thought I was invisible. That's the word I keep coming back to. Not weak, not old, not confused. Invisible. Like somewhere between my 71st birthday and the day we buried my wife, I'd stopped being a person anyone needed to account for. I was just furniture in the house I'd paid for over 40 years. Something to arrange around, to step past, to pretend wasn't listening. I was listening to every word. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it actually starts. Not at the funeral, not at the kitchen table when my son looked me in the eye and said things I will never unhear. Let me start on a Thursday evening in October, about 3 weeks after we lost Miriam, when I was sitting alone in our bedroom and I opened her nightstand drawer looking for an aspirin. I didn't find aspirin. I found a small manila envelope, sealed, with my name written on it in her handwriting. Just Clifford. Nothing else. Her handwriting was careful. She always wrote like she meant it. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time before I opened it. Miriam and I had been married 43 years. We met at a church picnic in Roanoke, Virginia, in the summer of 1982. She was 26. I was 28. She had a laugh that started slow and then took over her whole face, and I thought that was the most honest thing I'd ever seen in a person. We were married 11 months later. Our son Douglas came 2 years after that. Then our daughter Pamela 3 years after Douglas. We weren't rich people. I worked in facilities management for the county school district for 31 years. Miriam worked part-time as a bookkeeper for a dental practice until the kids were older, then full-time after Pamela started high school. We lived in the same house in Lynchburg for 38 years. We took one real vacation, Myrtle Beach, 1997. We drove. We ate at Shunny's on the way there and the way back. Miriam took pictures with a disposable camera and got them developed at the drugstore and put them in a photo album she still kept in the living room bookcase. We were not extraordinary people. We were just solid, dependable, the kind of people who show up. When Miriam got her diagnosis, pancreatic cancer stage 3, found almost by accident during a routine scan for something else, she did not fall apart. She sat in the car outside the oncologist's office and she held my hand and she said, "Okay, so we deal with it." That was Miriam. She did not rage at the unfairness. She organized it like it was a problem she could manage. She lived 14 months after the diagnosis, long enough to see Douglas's youngest start kindergarten, long enough for one more Thanksgiving, which she planned in full and cooked most of. She passed on a Tuesday morning in August, at home in our bed with me holding one hand and the hospice nurse on the other side. I didn't know what to do with the quiet that came after. Douglas and his wife Renee drove down from Richmond 3 days before the funeral. Pamela flew in from Phoenix with her husband Kirk. They were all very attentive at first. Renee kept refilling my coffee. Kirk fixed the screen door that had been sticking since spring. My grandchildren were respectful, subdued. Douglas kept his arm around my shoulder at the graveside service, and I was grateful. It lasted about 4 days. I noticed the shift first in small things. Renee going through the kitchen cabinets, not looking for something she needed, just looking. Douglas asking questions about the property in a way that felt practiced, like he'd rehearsed the casual tone. Pamela disappearing upstairs for long stretches and then coming back down a little too quickly, a little too smooth. On the 5th day, Douglas sat me down at the kitchen table and told me he'd been talking to a place in Richmond, an independent living community, he called it. He had a brochure. It had photographs of smiling people playing shuffleboard and doing watercolor painting. He pushed it across the table toward me like he was doing me a kindness. "You shouldn't be rattling around in this big house alone, Dad," he said. "I'm not rattling," I said. "I'm sitting." Renee appeared in the doorway. I don't know how long she'd been there. "It's just something to think about," she said in that tone. The one that means the decision has already been made and what you're doing now is being managed through it. I looked at that brochure. I looked at my son's face. Then I folded the brochure in half and I set it next to my coffee cup and I said I'd think about it. I was not going to think about it, but I needed time and I needed them to believe I was harmless while I figured out what was actually happening. That night, I sat in the bedroom again. I thought about the drawer. I thought about the envelope I hadn't opened yet. I opened it. Inside was a single key on a small ring. No label, no tag, nothing. Just a plain key, the kind you'd get cut at the hardware store, and a folded note card in Miriam's handwriting. It said, "Clifford, First Regional Bank, Harrisonburg Branch. Ask for the Personal Trust Department. Show them your ID and this key. Tell them you're the primary beneficiary. I love you. I've always been one step ahead of everything. M. I read it 4 times. Then I said out loud to no one, "Miriam, what did you do?" I didn't sleep that night. I lay on her side of the bed and stared at the ceiling and turned the key over in my fingers until the edges were warm from my hand. She had never mentioned Harrisonburg. We had our accounts at a local credit union here in Lynchburg. We'd had them there since 1987. I reviewed our statements every month. I thought I knew every number. Apparently, I did not know every number. The next morning, Douglas and Renee were having breakfast at my table like they lived there. Pamela and Kirk were planning to stay another week. They had started, and this is the part that still puts a cold feeling in my stomach. They had started moving things. Small things at first. Miriam's good mixing bowls, which Renee said were just going to sit here. A lamp from the guest room that Pamela thought would look nice in her house. I said nothing. I watched. I made a mental list. I told them I was going to run some errands. I put on my jacket. I drove the 45 minutes to Harrisonburg. First Regional Bank is a mid-sized bank with a few branches in the Shenandoah Valley. I didn't know Miriam had ever set foot in one. I walked in and asked for the personal trust department, just like the card said. A young woman with reading glasses and a very professional manner asked for my ID and for me to explain my business. I showed her my driver's license. I showed her the key. I told her my wife had passed 3 weeks prior, and I believed I was a named beneficiary. She excused herself. She was gone for about 7 minutes. When she came back, she was accompanied by an older man in a gray suit. The branch trust officer. He introduced himself as Harold Stokes. He shook my hand. His handshake was firm. He looked at me the way people look at someone they've been expecting. "Mr. Neary." "Gaines," he said. "Your wife has been a client of this branch for 22 years. She asked us to reach out to you upon her passing, but we'd not yet been able to reach you. I'm glad you came in. 22 years. I kept my face still. I said, "I appreciate that." What Miriam had built over 22 years, quietly, without ever saying a word to me or to anyone, was a trust. A revocable living trust, established in both our names, with me as sole beneficiary and trustee upon her death. She had funded it through a separate savings account she'd opened when she went back to full-time work in 1995. She put money in every month. Not a dramatic amount, sometimes $40, sometimes $100, once in a while more when she'd gotten extra hours at the practice. Over 22 years, with compound interest and a few modest investments the trust officer had managed on her instruction, it had become something I was not prepared for. I will not put the exact number here because it is private. I will say that it was substantial. Far more than I had imagined. Far more than Douglas and Renee had imagined. I guarantee you that. The trust also included, through a mechanism I'll explain in a moment, the house. Harold Stokes explained it to me carefully and clearly, the way you explain something to a person who deserves to understand it fully. When Miriam refinanced our house in 2006, I remembered that. I had signed documents. She had arranged, with the help of an attorney, to have the property titled into the trust, which meant the house was not part of my individual estate. It was trust property. It was managed by me as trustee for my own benefit, which meant no one could touch it without my consent, not Douglas, not Pamela, not Renee, not anybody. I drove home from Harrisonburg a different man than the one who had driven there. They were in the living room when I got back, all 4 of them, Douglas, Renee, Pamela, Kirk, and they had pulled out a legal pad and were writing something. Pamela put the pad face down when I walked in. Kirk gave Douglas a look. "Good errands?" Douglas asked. "Very productive," I said. I went to the kitchen and made myself a cup of coffee. I could hear them murmuring in the other room. I stood at the counter and looked out the window at the backyard, at the garden Miriam had kept for 30 years, at the raised bed she'd built herself from cedar planks. I thought about who she was. I thought about all the Saturdays she'd spent at that trust department in Harrisonburg while I thought she was running other errands. I thought about what it takes to love someone so quietly and so far ahead. I didn't feel angry. I felt something closer to awe. That evening, Douglas laid it out. He'd been speaking with a real estate attorney, a friend of Kirk's, he said, and they wanted to discuss the family's options going forward. He explained that since they were, in his words, stakeholders in the family estate, there were some conversations that needed to happen. He used the word stakeholders 3 separate times. I wrote it down later in the little notebook I'd started keeping. Renee added that it might be cleaner to sell the house, split things fairly, and let me use my portion for the independent living community. I let them finish. Then I said, I'd like to show you something. I went to the bedroom. I came back with the folder that Harold Stokes had given me, a copy of the trust document, the property title, and a letter from the trust attorney on file confirming my status as sole trustee and beneficiary. I set it on the coffee table. The house is held in trust, I said. I am the trustee. There is no estate to divide. There are no stakeholders except me. If either of you has a question about what that means legally, I suggest you consult your own attorney, not Kirk's friend, and they will confirm what I'm telling you. The room was quiet for a long time. Douglas looked at the papers. Then he looked at me. Something moved across his face that I couldn't fully name. It was part surprise, part reassessment, part something like shame. I hope it was shame. I hope he sat with that. Dad, he started, we weren't trying to... I know what you were trying, I said. I didn't say it hard, I said it level. And I'm asking you, all of you, to go home. Renee said something about how I was being unreasonable. Pamela started crying, which I had expected. She has always used tears the way other people use arguments. Kirk stayed quiet, which I respected, even if I didn't forgive him for the legal pad. I said, I love you both. I am not discussing this further. They left the following morning. There were not warm goodbyes. There were some tense, brief hugs and a lot of things said in the driveway in low voices that I did not try to hear. Renee did not look at me when she got in the car. Douglas hugged me last and held it a second longer than he had to, and I let him, because he is still my son, and that does not go away just because you find out who someone is when the stakes get real. The car backed out of the driveway. I stood on the porch and watched it go. Then I went inside and I sat in the kitchen and I drank a cup of coffee in absolute silence, and it was the best cup of coffee I'd had in weeks. In the months that followed, I did some things I should have done years earlier. I called my own attorney. Not a friend of anyone in my family, but a woman named Patricia in downtown Lynchburg who had been recommended by someone at my church. She reviewed everything Miriam had set up and confirmed it was airtight. She also helped me make some additions, my own updated will, a durable power of attorney with a trusted neighbor, a healthcare directive that made my wishes crystal clear. Patricia said, "Your wife did excellent work." I agreed. I also had a conversation with Douglas that was harder and more honest than anything we'd said to each other in probably 20 years. I told him that what happened, the brochure, the legal pad, Renee going through the cabinets, had hurt me in a way I was still working through. He listened. He didn't defend himself much, which was the right choice. He said he had let Renee lead on things he should have thought through himself. I believed him, partly. We're still in the process of figuring out what we are to each other now. These things take time. With Pamela, it has been slower. She called twice and apologized in that way where the apology is really an explanation. I told her I loved her and that I needed more time. I meant both things. I have been in this house alone now for almost a year. People keep asking if I'm lonely. Honestly, not in the way they mean. I eat breakfast at the table by the window where I can see Miriam's garden. I've been keeping it up myself, badly if I'm honest. The tomatoes are a disaster, but the zinnias she planted 2 autumns ago came back this spring like she planned it that way. I have started taking walks in the evening, down to the park 4 blocks over, which I hadn't done in years. I've been attending a grief support group at the church on Wednesday nights. I've been sleeping better. The neighbor who has my power of attorney, a retired postal worker named Gerald, 74, who has lived next door for 16 years, comes over for coffee on Saturday mornings. He knew Miriam well. We talk about her sometimes, and it doesn't always hurt, which I have been told is a sign of something moving in the right direction. I go to the trust department in Harrisonburg every few months to meet with Harold Stokes. Not because I need to. The money is managed and I have everything I need, but because I feel, somehow, that it's a way of checking in with Miriam. Sitting in that office where she sat, in the chair where she must have sat, talking about something she built piece by piece for 2 decades. Harold has told me a few things about her that I didn't know, that she always asked about his family, that she brought Christmas cookies one year and the whole office remembered it, that she once said, explaining why she was doing all of this, "My husband trusts the world too much. Someone has to stay one step ahead." I think about that a lot. I think about what it means to love someone that way, not by telling them, not by making a fuss, but by quietly working, quietly preparing, quietly making sure that no matter what happened, they would be okay. I was not as good at that as she was. I'm not sure I ever could have been, but I know it now. And knowing it changes something in how I move through the days. The house is mine. The garden is mine. The mornings are mine. And everything I need, everything she made sure I would have, is exactly where she left it. She was always one step ahead. I just had to catch up. I've thought a lot about what caused all of this. Not just the greed. That's the easy part to name. What I keep coming back to is how things like this don't happen suddenly. They build, slowly, quietly, over years of small choices that nobody bothers to examine. Douglas and Renee didn't wake up the week Miriam died and decide to become different people. They had been drifting in that direction for a long time. Little comments about the house, little jokes about what retirement communities were like, little ways of treating me like a man whose story was already finished. I missed most of it because I wasn't looking. I trusted too much. Not in a noble way. More in the way of a man who doesn't want to believe something uncomfortable, so he doesn't look directly at it. That's the first thing I'd say to anyone in a situation like mine. Your instincts are usually right. When something feels off, it is off. The discomfort you're tempted to swallow down and ignore. Pay attention to it. I sat at that kitchen table and felt something wrong in my bones when Douglas pushed that brochure at me, and I almost talked myself out of trusting that feeling. I'm glad I didn't. The second thing is about what Miriam understood that I didn't, which is that love isn't only what you say or how you feel. It's what you build. She didn't protect me by lecturing me, or by arguing with the kids, or by making a scene. She protected me by being disciplined and patient and intelligent over 22 years. She saw around corners I couldn't see. She built something solid before the storm arrived. That kind of love requires a person to think clearly, act consistently, and keep their own counsel when it would be easier to talk. I admire that more than I can say. I try to carry some of it into how I live now. And the third thing, maybe the hardest, is about what we teach people by what we allow. Douglas and Renee behaved the way they did partly because no one had ever shown them a consequence. The lines I had failed to draw over years of keeping the peace created the conditions for what happened after Miriam died. When I finally drew them, clearly and calmly, something shifted. Not everything, not immediately, but something. Douglas heard me in a way he hadn't before. People respond to firmness when it comes from a person who has been too easy for too long, because it signals that the person has finally decided they matter. I matter. Miriam spent 22 years making sure I would be okay when she was gone. The least I can do is live like I believe that. The zinnias she planted are blooming again. I didn't do anything special. They just came back because she chose the right seeds, put them in the right ground, and trusted they would hold. That's what she was. That's what she was. That's what she left me. I'm still learning how to deserve it.